Greetings everyone. Welcome to another episode of Heart Talk HR. I'm your host, Mihaly Nagy. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Stefan Seiler. Stefan is a Group Head of Human Resources, the CHRO at UBS. I was fortunate to catch up for a conversation with Stefan a couple of weeks ago at the HR Congress Virtual Summit. As 10 months now into the pandemic, 10 months into the lockdown, we were talking about what are some of the changes at the organization's experience, what are some of the changes UBS experience when it comes to culture, leadership, resilience, and grit. So I hope you will enjoy today's episode, and if you do, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. At Heart Talk HR, we bring you fresh ideas and inspiring content from around the world of work. So Stefan, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity of having you here with us at the Heart Talk HR live session.
Thank you very much, Mihaly. It's a big pleasure to be here, to be with all of you, and very much looking forward to our conversation.
Reason why I reached out to you on LinkedIn, because I read the article in Fast Company and you wrote it in January. I think it's January this year when the coronavirus pandemic was about to spread, but it was not officially declared as a pandemic. And in a Fast Company article, you put in that UBS HR innovation activities structured around the concept of insight, efficiency, experience, and connectivity. That's about how managing HR in a digital world. And reading that article, I thought this is something we should certainly talk about at this conference because these are so relevant. But now in 10 months into pandemic, probably even more relevant. So before we jump into detailed discussion, can you please briefly guide us through these four principles of HR innovation at UBS?
Thank you for reaching out and asking to discuss this topic here in this forum here. At UBS, we developed a few years back a concept on how we want to drive digital transformation, because what is very clear is that in a world already 2-3 years ago, maybe already 5 years ago, we all understood that the digital transformation is not if it happens or not. The question is only how do you adapt to it and how do you drive it? So parts you can influence and innovate, and others you need to adapt, because the world is changing so quickly, and digital transformation is obviously one of the key drivers for change and innovation. So we developed a framework which helped us to drive our journey on digital transformation. The framework builds, as you mentioned, on 4 pillars. The first one is insights. Digital transformation offers a huge opportunity to generate insights through data analytics. The second element is efficiencies. With digital, we can go much more efficient around a number of processes, and HR is a process heavy discipline. So we can actually front to back automate processes which make us much more efficient and effective in focusing more on added value tasks rather than on repetitive execution of pretty simple tasks, which are also part of our mandate. The third element, as you mentioned, is the question of experience. How do user experience to interact with HR? And this can be candidates out in the market, this can be employees, or this can also be alumni networks. How do they interact with us? So user experience for multi-channel is a huge opportunity from a digital innovation perspective. And the last one is connectivity. And connectivity has 2 angles. The way we look at it is, if you want to create insights through data, you need to connect data in a meaningful way. So therefore, your HR infrastructure, wherever data is captured, needs to be connected to each other, that you can start to make big data analysis. And for that, the systems need to be connected. And the second element where digital transformation, digital opportunities offer a huge opportunity is connecting people via innovative digital platforms. And so connectivity with regard to tools, but connectivity also with regard to people who want to work together on a project, on a topic, or create a network of employees or of interested people who work on a particular topic.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Stefan. So that time when you wrote the article, we were not in a work from home era, and then since then went in lockdown. By the way, how quickly the UBS employees were moved to work from home?
Yeah, This is really, I mean, when we started working on the article, we were in a very different environment. Obviously, when the article then finally got published, we were already slightly in the pandemic situation. But it was interesting. We could just add a few experiences which we have, and obviously now we are 10 months in the crisis, and we have many more learnings which you can adapt and bring into the discussion. What was interesting to see is the good thing about global organizations, and for all those who do have a large footprint in APAC as well, which UBS has as well, it was, of course, a huge advantage that we got exposed to the pandemic situation in the APAC region about a quarter earlier than the rest of the world. And so the APAC region got adapted to it. They developed some concepts. They also had experience from past with other pandemic situations like SARS, for instance. And so they built their practices around it in the regional crisis management teams. And when then, end of February, early March, when the virus spread over to Europe and the Americas, or to the rest of the world, you could say, then, of course, we could build very significantly and quickly in the Global Crisis Management Committee on the experiences we had. We had, within a few weeks, we had up to 95% of our employees were enabled to work from home. And on a consecutive day, we had about, in the peak of the pandemic, about 85% of our employees working from home. We obviously had, in the countries where we have branches, in Switzerland, predominantly, and in the US as well, the branches remained open partially, and most other employees were working from home. This was a massive technology-driven exercise, and also infrastructure-driven exercise, when you have to bring whole trading floors basically from the trading floor into people's home offices or living rooms. These were massive, massive endeavors. Many of our employees were already enabled to work remotely, because we had flexible work arrangements already in place for a number of our employees. But for some parts of our organization, this was really a massive endeavor to bring them to home working. The good thing is we didn't have a single day of business outages because of IT-driven infrastructure issues. So the platforms were stable, our employees were able to work, and they were able to connect with our clients day in and out, and also connect internally with each other day in, day out, which was a massive achievement. And many here attending the conference probably went through similar experiences and exercises.
Especially in an environment where you are in financial services, where you need to comply with the regulations and compliance, it must have been a major challenge, many sleepless nights. So in 10 months into the pandemic, what has, among these four pillars, insight, efficiency, experience, and connectivity, which of these have sort of gained importance, and in what way has it changed as per your views?
I think all four elements prove to be the right ones to drive new ways of thinking and working. And the pandemic was basically a huge acceleration of all the activities with regard to digital transformation and more agile working and higher flexibility in work arrangements. So it was a huge acceleration of many of the developments we already saw before. When I think about which of the four elements has significantly gained on importance, to me, very clear is the element of connectivity. Because when you are used to have many of your employees in an office somewhere in one of your locations, and once of a sudden, most of them are working from home, and you're only digitally connected, the question of how to stay connected to your employees, to your teams, and also how to stay connected to your clients is obviously the one that they had one of the highest importance levels which we had to bring into the system. But then also generating insights through data, because you have less observation points from face-to-face interactions. So basically observation points from how are your people doing when you look at them, how they work, when you look at them, how they interact. These are generating more and additional data points to basically try to cope with the data points you are losing, because you don't have that direct personal interactions anymore with large groups of your workforce.
Let's talk about leadership for a moment. I remember when we had a conversation prior to this call, we talked about leadership and how it has changed and how important it is now, even more so, to focus on certain leadership traits and qualities. So now, as again, 10 months in a pandemic, what are some of the leadership traits and competencies you see has gained sort of importance now? It were important before, but probably more important than now than ever before.
Yeah. I think what is important in general, and then I touch on the specific question, but in general, when we talk about digital transformation, I think we should never only focus on technology or on opportunities that are driven with by infrastructure, because the topic of leadership, even in normal times, is extremely important. If we want to transform our HR practices successfully, we need to change the way we think and the way we lead. Now, in the pandemic situation, I think we have seen an acceleration and an increase of the importance of leadership. I would highlight 3 elements. The first one is you need to have leadership that focuses on trust, combined with the right level of supervision. And you mentioned financial services being a highly regulated industry. Even when everybody works from home, you still need to have the right level of supervision to understand that your employees are doing the right things and are not going into territories where we don't want them to show behavior in. So trust combined with the right level of supervision, and trust because you're not that close, physically close to your employees anymore, so you need to have high levels of trust. The second element, I would say, is definitely what we discussed before, is connectivity. You need to emphasize in your leadership activities much more on staying connected. So while it is naturally happening, once of a sudden it doesn't naturally happen anymore. So you need to initiate a conversation that the conversation happens. So the connectivity aspect. And I think another element which is extremely important is a much higher level of individualization, because many of your employees once of a sudden are confronted with very different life situations. Some of them, in particular in the early phase of the pandemic, when many countries also closed the schools, once of a sudden they had kids at home. They had to organize their work location at home. They also had to take care, do homeschooling. Other people had elderly people, which were causing huge stress factor because of the risk exposure that was driven by the risk groups being exposed to the virus. Others again had small apartments they lived in, and once of a sudden they were 24/7 almost in these apartments. For some, the kitchen table also became the office and the kids' working table. So your employees had much more individualized life challenges to cope with, in addition to the work challenges that were there. So an individualized approach as a leader to your employees. So I would say trust, individualization, and connectivity are 3 elements which we see that we have to pay even more attention now in the pandemic situation compared to before.
We have heard throughout the conference the importance of trust, building the culture around trust, creating a feedback culture, and starts with trust. Vice versa, once you have feedback, then it builds trust as well. So that's a very, very important point, and thank you for emphasizing that as well. You've mentioned digital transformation. I'd like to touch on that a little bit. Recently, it was a year ago actually, when Josh Bersin published an article about when HR is in charge of digital transformation, already heavily involved early on. It's 3-to-1 success, more likely that digital transformation will succeed. In your organization, how HR has been involved in transforming?
We look at it from 2 angles. One is, how do we transform our HR organization as a function? And the other one is, which role does HR play to transform the overall organization, in particular the workforce and the way we work? And here HR at UBS is at the forefront of being very closely interacting with the business as a thought leader, as a challenger, and also where necessary as a control function, because certain elements which you may want to do, you may not be able to do because of labor laws or different practices and principles in place, but very closely linked to the business to design together with the business leaders how to best equip and enable a workforce for the future that is digitally enabled, with the right mindset and with the right capabilities, and that has the right qualities to interact with our clients in a way that also the clients understand that the UBS services get delivered via multi-channel framework rather than just focusing on a traditional setup. And here, of course, the pandemic has just acted as a massive boost in the speed of this transformation, by the sheer fact that once of a sudden you had to interact digitally. And interestingly, most people value it and like it and appreciate it because they get done more. You don't have to travel to a particular place. You can actually put more work into one day if you do a lot of your work in a digital way. Of course, maybe we also touch on that. There are also some downsides to work digitally, but there are a number of upsides. And of course, to be forced into this helps to boost change, because some people may not have embarked on the journey as quickly as they did now, because now everybody had to embark on the journey. There was no choice.
You've mentioned how the pandemic has accelerated digital adoption. If you were to estimate, how many years have we leapfrogged in the future because of the pandemic?
Well, that's a difficult question. As I always say, as I'm a data-driven person who obviously loves interaction and relationships. I rather try to analyze and do the right things to be ready for the future and drive the future, rather than trying to read into the crystal ball. But I would say several years. I would say the pandemic has accelerated our developments for several years, and because we had our 5-year imagination, our 10-year imagination, but the scenario that you almost 100% interact internally and with the external world in a virtual way, and you are still very well positioned in your business and in your industry. And now, of course, I have to make a bracket. UBS is performing very well through the crisis, but that's because the industry is very important and can help to tackle the crisis. So I don't want to come across as that is purely an organizational driver. It's also an industry driver, and some industries are unfortunately very, very badly hit by the crisis per default. No matter how good the organization is positioned, certain industries are just not able to perform at the moment. So, but when I look at how well we can still perform under these circumstances, nobody can argue that it's not possible to operate in a digital way. And by the way, 91% of our employees told us in a recent survey that they are equally or more productive by working from home in a digital way compared to the way they worked before. That's a very interesting number, that most of our employees believe that they are equally or more productive the way we operate at this point in time.
Of course, in this case, not just digital leapfrog in the future, but it's also in terms of looking at work as we challenging our assumptions and our paradigms about work, when and how it should take place. Now that's also kind of a leap for a future. And you've mentioned UBS has been doing well. I understand. I know that you've onboarded around 3,000 new colleagues throughout the pandemic. And let's talk about culture. How do you ensure preserving UBS culture when you are getting new people on board when they are physically distant?
Yeah, this is a very important topic, and I think by now it's already probably in the 4,000 or 5,000 since the pandemic started, which we have onboarded completely virtually. So this means these people, these new hires, have never physically met with a UBS person, most of them through the hiring process. That one was already possible before, because we had very advanced digital interview techniques or surveys that were data-driven with pre-selections on scoring on web-based selection assessments, but also the onboarding. And here, what is important is, first of all, you have a corporate brand. And of course, if you have a strong brand, that is extremely helpful, because you can send all the material to your employees, to your new employees, as in their onboarding phase, with a brand on top or on the bottom that is known, and it makes them part of a well-known group, a well-known entity. The second is, you then need to show in the trainings you do, in the onboarding trainings, in the virtual welcome day, which we are having. So we switched the welcome day from a physical interaction welcome day, we switched to a 100% virtual day with experience sessions driven as well. So you do this more traditional type of switching from digital, from physical to digital. And in addition to that, what we did as well is we created a one landing page, we call it Ways of Working, where you have a lot of digital tools at hand which help managers with their existing teams or also with new joiners to work on UBS culture. We have, for instance, established a digital self and team assessment and structure a team discussion around culture at UBS and how to adapt that in a virtual environment. So we have tried to put instruments and tools into the hands of our managers, which help them to stimulate virtual discussions with their teams, that culture becomes an active topic of your conversations. Because infrastructure helps to create culture, as we all know. If the infrastructure falls away because you're all work from home and you don't have the brand around you constantly, then you need to make sure that the topic of culture doesn't disappear, and it needs to become a much more active part in management conversations. So that's why we stimulated a lot of virtual activities with our managers and their teams to discuss culture. What does it mean to be at UBS? What do our behaviors of integrity, collaboration, and challenge, what do they mean? How can we collaborate in a virtual environment? What does it mean to create cohesion in a completely virtual team? So these are all very specific questions which we tackled with very specific recommendations to management on how to work around these topics.
Our tagline of a conference is reshaping in the next norm. Now, you mentioned that 90% of your employees are happy and productive working from home. You've onboarded 4,000 or 5,000 new employees. They never set a foot at any physical UBS building. So what's going to happen to those beautiful UBS offices? Are you going to give those places up?
I think it's too early to say how much infrastructure you need. But what is, I think, very fair to say is that the way we use infrastructure is going to change significantly. Maybe it leads to less physical infrastructure, so buildings that are required. But what we will for sure see is that we will see a shift on how we look at infrastructure. So what I see in the long run is a change from thinking about desk to employee ratio. When we think about workspace, I think much more about, okay, what type of work do we do where? In which location are we doing which type of work? We have, for instance, 85% of our employees are telling us that they want to do work from home in a post-COVID environment. So we have the vast majority of our employees enjoys partially working from home or full work from home, even post-pandemic. So what we foresee is that office infrastructure in hub locations where we are currently having our office buildings, or most of our office buildings, they will become most likely much more collaborative workspace. So they will become hubs where people meet to do creative and collaborative working tasks. We then see most likely more of our employees working from home. We already had that concept in place for big parts of our organization, but we see that now for more and larger parts of the organization. So partial working from home for large groups of people. And I could even imagine, of course, this is now forward-looking thinking and is nothing that is set in stone, and it's not that we have decided on it, but I could imagine that you will see more regional little clusters evolving where you create workspace that is UBS workspace, but maybe not in the large working buildings where people gather in the centers. So you have work from home, smaller, maybe closer to work locations related smaller work environments, and the hubs where we will see more collaborative work environments. So I think we need to think about work environment much more in an integrated way about what are the strategic goals of the company, what is our leadership style, what is our culture, how do we work together, and how does our infrastructure, including technology and office buildings, support to be as effective and efficient in order to achieve our goals, rather than thinking about desk and headcount ratios. So, and I believe this will definitely be a way of thinking and a way of action which will drive the next, it starts now already, and it will drive the foreseeable future with regard to office infrastructure development.
And who would have thought that in November 2020, this is a conversation we're going to have? I mean, a year ago, let's say, if anybody asked you whether it's going to be on your talking point, probably would have said, are you out of your mind? Why would it be? And there we go. We're changing for the better, hopefully, and we're creating more individualized workplaces and opportunities. And that's just great. Let's just talk about a little bit on resilience and grit. As technology, we're able to cope with the current challenges. Processes were able to cope with the current challenges. But it's obviously the pandemic has a massive emotional toll on people, on people's energy. So what is your view? How shall we deal with the emotional burden of this isolation, what we are experiencing now?
Yeah, I think you're touching here one of the most important in the moment topics for HR, but for every manager, I would say actually for every organization, for every employee out there. Because if you think about future ways of working in a post-pandemic environment, it's a completely different setup than when we talk about it right now. Because right now you don't have a choice how you work. And you don't design your workspace the way I described it before with all these options available. Right now, you are forced to operate in a particular way, dependent on the country you're in. You have more or less restrictions which force you to operate in a particular way. And in addition to that, you have a huge pressure from a health perspective. People are worried. They don't know exactly how the virus might impact themselves or not, or their kids in school, or maybe for those with elderly parents or family. Or those that are in the risk groups, it's a huge stress factor that all comes together. And for those companies that are involved in and are still operational, many companies have a much increased workload, or others, you see a significantly decreased workload, and then you have fundamental stress factors like the worry of losing your job, which is there. And as I said, in our industry, it's different because our workload just increased because you have a lot of activity on the trading side, on the advisory side, and on the internal transformation side. So all this combination puts a lot of stress on each individual, on each manager, and on each team and the whole organization altogether. So focusing on resilience is key and core. What we do is a number of very easy to observe metrics. Of course, we look at the sickness days. We look at the use of the employee assistance program usage. Do we see an increase there? We have pulse survey which are ongoing. Right now, we still get the feedback that more than 90% of our employees tell us that they feel UBS takes well care of their health and well-being. We have a lot of mobilization for our line managers to focus on well-being of their employees. We have implemented app solution which focus on nutrition, on sport activities, on sleep, also on meditation, so that people really get professional advice on whatever matters to them to stay healthy. And we continue, of course, to make sure our work environment is very safe for those who have to be in the office, or we ask most of our employees wherever possible to work from home to have less exposure to being exposed to larger groups of people. We are continuing to build on the metrics, how to measure that. So for instance, to look at near miss events or full miss events, to look at absenteeism. We have a number of metrics which we are currently in the evaluation phase, also with business risk management and compliance. How can we get a good early sense that when something goes wrong, we detect it early and that we don't fall over the cliff when the resilience would be overstretched. So I think organizational resilience and health and well-being must be and is a key priority. Regular feedback from employees is one of the best indicators in my view, and managers that are closely, and again, I come back to our initial conversation of connectivity, stay close to your employees. In banking, we have a principle, know your client, which is a compliance, very important on a compliance aspect. It also matters, know your employees, know your team members. So again, the individualized approach of understanding how their individual life situation is, to understand the stress factors below, in addition to the traditional job stress aspects.
So maybe we are physically distant, but we got to get more connected now than ever before, and that will help us through this situation. Of course, pandemic will be over one day. Thank you so much, Stefan Seiler, being here with us today. I really appreciate your time, and it's been an absolute fantastic speaking with you. Thank you.
Mihaly, thank you very much, and looking forward to another conversation. Thanks.